Welcome to another episode of Fast to Heal Stories. So happy you all joined me and my very special guest over the next hour or so. I'm very excited that my guest that I'm interviewing today approached me a couple of months ago because this is a topic I know we haven't discussed thoroughly on the podcast, but I have Vasudha Viswanath with me today, and she is releasing a vegetarian cookbook next week when this airs. It'll be up and available for purchase. It's on pre-order right now, but she will have it available next week. And I'm very honored to be interviewing her because everybody knows who listens to my podcast knows I'm not vegetarian and that I have more of a meat-centered diet, but that's not to say that the vegetarian approach or the vegan approach even doesn't serve a lot of people and serve their bodies well. So I am very excited to have her resource, her cookbook available. And I know not everybody who's listening can hear me, but if you're watching on YouTube, it's a beautiful, beautiful cookbook, hardcover. It's called The Vegetarian Reset. And what I'm most excited about is the subtitle is 75 low carb plant forward recipes from around the world. So go and try to find a vegetarian cookbook that's also focused on low carb. It will be very challenging to do. So welcome. I'm so excited that you're here, Vasudha.
Hi, Shanna. Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for that amazing introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here and to connect with your listeners.
Yeah, so let's talk about this cookbook and your lifestyle and how you approach the vegetarian lifestyle and kind of your backstory, because I know a little bit about it and it's all in your cookbook. And but like I said, it's really challenging to and my listeners know I focus on a higher protein. Like try to eat more protein and carbohydrates in the day if you have metabolic issues, and most of my listeners do. And that can get challenging when you're focused around plant-based eating. So give us a little bit of your backstory and what led you up to even create this beautiful resource.
For sure. So I've been vegetarian all my life. I grew up in India, and my family has been vegetarian for generations, as have many in that part of the world. But I always loved cooking, even as a child, and I've been a bit of an experimenter. My whole family is filled with foodies. We're always fighting about our next meal. So, growing up, it was always about the food. I moved to the US over a decade ago for grad school. And when I moved here, I was a little surprised that the Western notion of vegetarian food was a little different from what I'd grown up with. Here people perceive it as the healthy option. You're eating a lot of salads and steamed vegetables. And I had personally never considered a salad a meal until I moved to the US. So it was a bit of a surprise. But, it is, I think a lot of people also find that hard to sustain, eating raw salads or, bland food. And so I think over time, a lot of vegetarians or even vegans might find that their diet becomes dominated by refined carbs, whether it's bread or rice or pasta. And that was true for me too. And fast forward a few years, I was married. My husband and I live in New York City. We would eat out a lot. We would travel a fair bit. It was always about the food. And then I had my baby. And a year after that, I was trying desperately to lose those 25 pounds of post-pregnancy weight. And this time it was hard. I thought I was doing everything right. I was working out. I was eating home-cooked food. But the pounds just wouldn't come off. And then I had a physical, which revealed that my hemoglobin A1C was in the pre-diabetic range. And that was a wake-up call for me. It wasn't that scary because, it was right at the tip. But it was still a wake-up call because I'd always considered myself fit and healthy. I've never been overweight. And, I did high intensity exercise. How can this happen to me? So my my doctor's note just said minimize rice and pasta and bread. And for a moment, I just scratched my head and said, what am I supposed to eat instead? Because this is how I eat. This is how I've eaten all my life. And so that's when I really started to do my research and had my aha moment. I learned about insulin resistance and the science behind why we put on weight. More than weight, I learned how it's connected to all these chronic diseases, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, brain disease even. And I learned how important our hormones were, and how food is related to influencing our hormones, and how that hormonal dysregulation can really screw around with your health. And so then I got really convinced of the rationale, and I said, all right, I'm going to try this low carb thing. So I started to look online for recipes for vegetarians, and it was, pretty dull and uninspiring when I could find a recipe. There's only so much eggs and cheese and avocado that I can eat, and my tongue, the spice and flavor that I had grown up with. So I said, all right, I can do this on my own. I made a big spreadsheet of ingredients and their, nutrition facts. And then I bought my first pack of cauliflower rice, and then there was just no looking back.
Perfect. So I'm curious as to when you said you moved here, the vegetarian culture or diet in the US was a lot different from what you were used to in India. Were you able to kind of mimic that with ingredients that you were able to find here, or was it just completely different? Like you had to learn a different way to approach it?
No, I think, like 10 years ago, it was still a very kind of global scene. And I moved to Pittsburgh initially because that's where I went to grad school, and then I moved to New York City. And there's a fairly big Indian community there, as well as in New York City, and groceries are fairly easily available. And I always knew how to cook, so that really wasn't an issue. I also loved tasting food from different cultures, which there is so much of in New York. We would eat out, try new restaurants every week. So it wasn't hard at all. So our dinner table even today is it's partially Indian, but often during the week there would be a soup. I think I learned to cook a lot more globally after I moved here. So you'll find all sorts of meals on our dinner table, and I think the US is certainly quite vegetarian friendly. At least the pockets that I have lived in. I know different pockets can be different, but at least the cities that I lived in were fairly cosmopolitan, and it wasn't an issue.
Sure. Well, that's good to hear. And like you said, it really, I mean, the United States is huge. It's really dependent on the area that you're in and what is available. And that holds true for
and you're absolutely right.
About.
I had friends that had very different experiences, and I think things have gotten easier than they used to be like 20 years ago. Like my parents used to live in California like 40 years ago for a few years, and they would talk about how they had to drive like 30 miles to get to the closest Indian restaurant. So it's very different now.
Sure. And so when I see on somebody's intake form, like when I work with somebody individually, or they're going through a program and they're say or I have a lot of people reach out via Instagram or email and say, I'm vegetarian, can I still do your program? And I always say, well, absolutely you can, but just know that it's a little more challenging for you to meet your protein goals and your protein targets that I set for you. And I always want to dive deeper. And this is true again for anybody and any culture, anything, any food that they're following, their overall diet. I don't like the word diet, but their overall eating approach is I need to dive deeper, but I feel like there's a very healthy way to do vegetarian and there's a not. And a lot of people, at least in the American culture, are like, okay, I'm going vegetarian. And a lot of time, and I find not always, but more in the American culture, it's more like teenage girls. That's kind of where it starts for them. Not always, but a lot of times that's kind of where it starts. And they're more like, okay, I'm eating macaroni and cheese. I'm eating cheese pizza. I'm eating potato chips, maybe some fresh fruits or vegetables. But it's very glorified, I think, for teenage girls. And they're not following the healthy way. They're not focused on protein. They're just eating, if it says vegetarian, vegan, and that's a hot seller in, for food manufacturers
Find
as
all
well.
sorts of junk today marketed as vegan and gluten-free.
Exactly. Yeah. So the gluten-free label, the vegan label doesn't hold a lot of merit for a lot of foods. So I'm curious, like when you were growing up, what was the focus of, I mean, I know it was vegetarian, but was there a focus on like coupling certain foods together or a focus on protein, or what was that like for you growing up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think most vegetarian cultures in the world, whether it's, like say the Greeks or and they're not completely vegetarian, but the Mediterranean diet is still very veggie centric. And even in India, a lot of our traditional foods revolve around grains. And in the past, it would be ancient grains, whole grains. Like in India, I think barley and millets were used quite heavily. But that has changed a lot in the last 50 to 100 years, with new agricultural practices adopted similar to the US all over the world. And so today, the average vegetarian diet in India, and for me growing up, so our food is always cooked. So it's usually like in South India, the staple food is rice. And so our meals will always consist of rice with some cooked legume or lentils. Definitely lots of vegetables at every meal. But the focal point tends to be at every meal grains. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think when you make that refined grains and over time, just the load of those refined grains compared to the quantity of the vegetables on your plate, that becomes imbalanced. So I think growing up, I had a lot of delicious, flavorful meals. And I don't think Indian vegetarian food at its core, I think, is actually really healthy. But we need to watch today, particularly with our sedentary lifestyles, the quantity of refined grains that we eat. And, vegans and vegetarians think we eat a lot of vegetables, but we're mostly eating rice and maize and wheat. And we need to kind of reverse that balance a little bit. But
Yeah,
the food is always really flavorful, filled with spices. We cook with, today, I guess, again, there's seed oils, which are not great, but in the past, it would be coconut oil. Or ghee is used a lot heavily in Indian cuisine. And, we bloom spices in ghee or oil and add them to a dish that's called tadka, or the tempering of spices. And I think the Indian style of cooking can make vegetables and legumes delicious, absolutely delicious. It's, it's not a sad substitute for meat. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's such a great point to really focus on. It doesn't matter if you're following vegan, vegetarian, carnivore, paleo, keto, the whole foods is what really makes a difference. And
Exactly
it
right.
doesn't matter which one you adapt. Like a lot of times, those first couple of weeks or months, people are going to be feeling better no matter what.
It's a
They're
flight to
adapting.
quality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they're just getting the processed junk out. They're getting the seed oils out. They're getting the sugars out, and your body is going to be more nourished no matter what. So, so I'm curious. So you have your baby, you get the diagnosis of pre-diabetes. How did you know that things were starting to go wonky? Was this just like a checkup that you went in to do, or were you showing signs of insulin resistance, such as like cravings, inability? You said the weight loss wasn't coming off. Um, what else? Like having to eat every couple of hours, any skin
Yeah.
issues? Were
You
you
know, I
seeing
would
those things?
my meals tended to revolve around starch. So like I would have this big bowl of oatmeal in the morning. I mean, I would add like chia seeds and things like that, but it was still a pretty large bowl, and I would feel like taking a nap, an hour later. Um, and if I had a sandwich for lunch or something rice-based for lunch, I would feel like taking a nap soon after. Sometimes I would eat a salad whenever I felt guilty. But I think my energy levels were always going up and down. I did experience those sugar highs and lows. Um, my period was heavier.
Mhm.
I would often break out,
Yeah.
and my energy levels, and I didn't think back then that there was anything wrong with my energy levels. I didn't see signs necessarily, but once I started eating a different way, then I could really see a huge change in my energy levels and my mood and everything. And then I realized, then I could really see when I pulled a lever, when I ate certain foods, how I felt. And I became a lot more acutely aware of how food affected how I felt. And that was not something I was really in tune with before. I just ate for pleasure. This looks delicious, I'm going to eat it.
Mhm.
But now I care more about how food makes me feel.
Yeah, and when you have a new baby, especially your first baby, it's like, well, I'm just tired because I have a baby and I'm not sleeping as much, and babies are exhausting. And maybe this is just how it's going to be for me for from now going forward. But yeah, pregnancy is just a time that really can change hormones. I
Yes.
mean, hormones change a ton, but thyroid issues pop up during pregnancy a lot of times. Did you have gestational diabetes at all during your
I did
pregnancy?
not.
No.
I did
Okay.
not, luckily. And because I know that can be really hard to navigate. And
Hmm.
yeah, I was lucky not to have it. And this happened ex post, so I was able to change things around pretty soon.
Yeah.
But I do know people that did, and it wasn't easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me about your experience when you got the type 2 or the pre-diabetes. Not you were not type 2 yet, but the pre-diabetes diagnosis. What did your blood work look like, if you don't mind sharing with us? What kind of education were you provided, if any? And,
Yeah,
were you
it
given
was,
guidance to reverse it?
yeah, for sure. I think now when I think about it, that was really the defining moment for me, or kind of the catalyst to get me started. But at the time, it didn't feel like a huge deal, because it was a little bit into the pandemic. I was working from home. I had, a 1-year-old, and I was finally able to spend some time with her because I was working from home. We had help through the pandemic, so that was really great. And just made it so much easier than I know it was for many other people. So it was just a physical that I went. I made some time. I went because it had been a year. We had been at home, and the results were just on an app. And generally it's never, I've touched wood, I've never had bad news. So I would just skim through the results. I don't even remember the exact numbers. My HbA1c I remember, because that was the one that the doctor had flagged. It was I think 5.9.
Okay.
So it was right on the tip. It wasn't crazy. And the doctor had just left a little note at the bottom saying your A1C is trending elevated and it's in the pre-diabetic range. I would minimize bread and rice and pasta and sweets. That was it. I'm sure if I had, gone back to her and asked a bunch of questions, she would have helped me. But I was just busy. I was like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
what does this mean? And then, when I had some time, I Googled it, and then I was like, oh, wait, so I'm eating all these refined grains that are considered not so healthy. And then that's when I kind of went into the rabbit hole of kind of looking through that and the why, and asking the question why. And, I always have to be convinced of things through my own research. And so I read a lot of books, and I've actually listed them in the resources section of my cookbook, because I think if people read even one or two of them, they would be extremely helpful. For example, Why We Get Sick by Dr. Ben Bickman.
Yeah,
I think
one of my favorites.
it was a book that made me realize that it wasn't just about the weight. It's connected to so many things. And, maybe people will never get pre-diabetic, but they might have PCOS or one of these other issues, and you would never know that it was because of diet, right? And so that was really my journey. So I would say that test was kind of my catalyst to kind of get me started being curious about it. But it was probably my frustration with the pounds not coming off that really drove me to try a different way of eating. And once I did it was shocking how fast it worked, because, I didn't think, generally when you read about weight loss and all of that, you see like maybe you lose a pound a week. That's kind of the sustainable way. And it can be completely different for different people. So I don't want to generalize. But for me, I think my body just woke up to this new way of eating and was like, what is going on? And so it was a pretty fast transformation in a matter of weeks.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you weren't looking at like a long-standing issue. So usually it does happen a little bit faster.
My turnaround, it wasn't very dramatic, but I think just philosophy-wise, it was such a turnaround for me. But I had grown up hearing, low fat, lots of grains, don't eat a lot of butter and ghee, and buy the skim milk, and I can't believe it's not butter, that kind of thing. So it was just a whole new world, and it just made so much more sense.
Yeah, and just having that knowledge, like you said, like you're not afraid to gain weight anymore. You're not afraid to develop those disease processes because you know what causes them. So as long as you keep the lifestyle that you do now, there's no reason to develop those issues. So yeah, so for those listening, the hemoglobin A1C yours was 5.9%. And I think in the conventional system, they kind of flag over 5.7%. I like to see it under 5.4%. But it's a little bit different wherever you go. So you got your diagnosis, you start reading up on insulin resistance. You say, okay, I gotta get rid of these refined foods. Do you use targets now? Like, do you kind of, like I teach my students therapeutic carb restriction, depending on their goals, their past history, how active they are. It really differs from person to person, but did did you like use some targets as far as like carbohydrate goes or other macronutrients, fat, protein, or what was your approach?
So I was trying to get at least 60 grams of protein a day, and then later I found out from my trainer that I should be aiming for more like 100 grams a day if I wanted to build, like get stronger and not just kind of maintain. So that's kind of what I aimed for in terms of protein. The carbs, initially, I just wanted to, that's why I call this book a reset. I just wanted to reset. So I was doing everything low carb. I wasn't really eating even whole grains. But I did always eat legumes because it's a big part of my Indian diet, rice and dal, if you've ever heard of it. And I think if I couldn't have that, it would have made me depressed. So I would just have cauliflower rice with beans or lentils.
Excuse me.
So I think that so initially I was just curious how much that would add up to. So when I made my recipes, I would check, and so I was typically under like 60 to 70 grams of carbs a day. And, this is, I think, including the carbs and the non-starchy vegetables, which is not a lot. And then later I did start to, I would sometimes eat like a piece of whole wheat, a roti, and or some whole grain, maybe quinoa or brown rice. And typically, I think even today, I maintain to under 100 grams of carbs, but I don't have to try very hard because that's just now become a way of eating. So, and I vaguely know, portion sizes and what they would kind of add up to. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another great point that I try to get across to all my clients, listeners, students, is when you're in the disease state, trying to reverse it, put it in remission, the carbohydrate intake is going to look different than it is for maintenance. And once you're to the point where you can add a little bit more back. So you were under more like 60 when you're reversing the process, putting it into remission. And now your body's different and you're more insulin sensitive and you can handle a little bit more carbohydrate. You're healthier metabolically. And now you're closer to that 100. And I'm the same way. Like I eat around 100 grams. I don't count them, but I know I don't go over that. There's days I'm probably 50 or under. There's days I might be a little over that 100. But it was important to restrict them for a time period to let your body heal and metabolically, and then you were able to be not so conservative with those. So I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, well, what do you eat for protein? How do you get to 100 grams of protein as a vegetarian? And then we'll look at more like what your cookbook's broken down into. But how do you meet that 100 grams? And then, let us know if you include eggs and dairy or if you're completely vegan.
Yes. So I'll answer your second question first. I do include eggs and dairy. I've always eaten them growing up. And, I didn't see a need to, I was always tolerant of dairy. I know some people aren't. So didn't feel the need to cut them out. Protein can be difficult to get on a vegetarian or vegan diet when you're trying to restrict the carbs, because many, like lentils and legumes are great sources of protein, but they're also big sources of carbs. And so you would end up eating a lot of calories and a lot of carbs if you're trying to get your protein exclusively from those things. So some protein dense sources that I tended to use heavily are Greek yogurt, which is basically regular yogurt that has been strained to remove the whey, and it has like 3 times the protein as regular yogurt in that single serving. And There are a lot of, traditional cuisine foods that are yogurt based, whether it's Indian cuisine or Mediterranean cuisine. And it's very easy to make a side and add it to your meal of raita or tzatziki. And they're delicious, and you just won't know how the protein went down. Cheese, good artisan cheese, not like the cheese slices that we
Right.
is a good source of protein as well. So full fat dairy I do use in my recipes. I use eggs moderately in my recipes as well. And then if you're completely plant-based, tofu is great. Tempeh I discovered fairly recently compared to tofu, and that has even more protein than tofu has, and it even tastes a little bit like it has this chewy texture that perhaps resembles meat, so it might be a good meat substitute for some people. I haven't really tried any of the Beyond Burger type.
That was my next question.
Maybe some people like them, but I'm not attracted to the meat substitutes because I just don't enjoy meat. So I can't comment on that. I think many of them are really processed, so I wouldn't make it mainstay. I think there's also smart ways that I discovered that you can add a little protein boost to every meal. So in my soups, I will often add a little bit of lentils and a little bit of nut. And I'll pressure cook the lentils and nuts along with, if it's a cauliflower, like in my book, I have a loaded cauliflower soup. So I call it loaded because it has a cauliflower base, but I also add lentils and cashews in there. So you get a nice little protein boost in that soup that you would not normally get if you were just eating a cauliflower soup. So there's ways to make sure you're getting a little boost with every meal. But to hit the 100 or over that, I think it's hard to do unless you have some sort of protein shake. Because you would just need to eat so much more, and I just don't have the appetite to eat that much more. So I use a grass-fed whey protein, and my normal breakfast is I'll have a protein shake, but it has not just the protein; it also has fat and fiber, and it's a really balanced smoothie in the morning. In my book, I only provide natural sources of protein, though I figure there's lots of sources for protein shakes out there, so maybe that's a different book. But I kind of try to pull all of these levers. Did I mention edamame? I probably did.
No,
So
I don't think so.
another fantastic source. I use it in a couple of recipes in the book, but you could just snack on steamed edamame or add a side of edamame to your meal, sprinkle it with a little sea salt, and it's delicious. Again, high in protein, high in fiber, lower in carbs. So yeah, and even vegetables have protein. So if you're eating non-starchy vegetables, anything in the cruciferous family, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, dark leafy greens, spinach, all of that. They barely have any carbs. They have more fiber, and they even have some protein. So can't go wrong there.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for providing all of those ideas. And again, it really comes back. For the most part, when you're trying to really hit targets and using whole foods, there's a little bit of thought process that that needs to happen. A little bit of planning, making sure you have those foods available. Not just having a meal of buttered noodles and calling it good. You're just not going to hit your nutrition, and you're going to be hungry a couple hours later because you don't have the protein and enough fat there. to really sustain you. You're going to burn through those carbohydrates really quickly and elevate your insulin, and then you're going to be hungry. But I really love how I'll just show like a page of, this is one that I really, I'll move it over this way. I really want to try is the feta pasta.
Yeah.
And I love how you have the breakdown in here for the protein, the carbs, and the fat. I think that that's all people need are those macronutrients. It's like sometimes people get so wrapped up with, oh, I have to have this many calories. And, you know, when people work with me, I'm like, your first target with working with me is going to eat more protein than carbohydrates throughout the course of the day. Let's start there, wrap
Yeah.
your head around that, figure out how you're going to do that, what sources of protein, whether they're vegetarian based, like all the ones that you just listed, there's ways to do it. But it does take some planning and preparation. So it's nice to have resources like this and have it at your disposal. The pictures are beautiful. The nutrition breakdown is there. And you have breads, rice, pasta, salads, soups, eggs, smoothies, desserts. I mean, there's just a little bit of everything in here. So it's a very important book, and I hope that we see more resources like this coming out because they're very necessary. And I am curious, when you were keeping your carbs under a certain level, were you also incorporating like time restricted eating or intermittent
Yes.
fasting, those types of things? What did you do then? What do you do now? Because of course we talk a lot about that on the podcast as well, is reversing those disease processes, lowering insulin. The timed eating is a huge component of it, and then keeping the carbs, and targeting the whole food. So yeah, tell us about your experience with that.
Yeah, it's huge. So I was reading a book at the time called The Fast 800, which is this, it's a low-carb Mediterranean diet, but the author also encouraged time-restricted eating and the pairing of those two things. And that was the first time I really understood that when you eat matters as much as what you eat. And so I decided to try it. I think the first day I did a 14 or 15-hour fast, I was a little worried, how am I going to make it through that mark when I normally had my breakfast? But I didn't even know when it passed because I was on a work call. And so I think the key is when you're starting out, if you keep it busy, like don't do it on a day that you're just kind of sitting around, because then all you can think about is food. But you do it when you're busy, when you're working, or when you're dealing with your kids. I mean, time just goes by and you don't even know. I always drank black coffee in the morning, so I didn't have that problem that many people have, their milk and sugar in their coffee. But I think now there are ways that maybe you can add a splash of cream and it's still pretty close to a fast. I don't know how you think about that, but that was, so I think with fasting, I find that it's often more of a mental block than a physical one. And people think that we are so conditioned to believe that we need to keep snacking every couple of hours and eat all these tiny meals, but multiple meals a day. And that's how you're going to keep your blood sugar stable. That I think just trying it once or twice, that can be the biggest hurdle for people. Because I think everybody that I know that has tried it is like, oh, this is so easy. Why did I not do it before? I have not heard one person say this is really hard for me. And I'm not talking about really extended, like 18, 20, 24-hour fasts, just, between 14 and 16 hours a day. Like, I find that most people, once they try it, they're like, oh, this is the easiest thing that you can do. And for me, I found it liberating because, although I love cooking, it just eliminated like one meal in the day. And there was less washing up, less planning. It makes it easy. So I did try it, and I found that pairing time restricted eating with a low carb diet just kind of turbocharges things. And sometimes you hit a plateau with a low carb diet. That, at least for me, I found that doing a slightly extended fast at that time, like I've experimented with like 24-hour and 36-hour fasts. I can't do them very often.
Right.
But if I do them once in a while, I find that if I'm kind of stuck, it gets things going again. And till today, if I have, a really carby heavy weekend, like after Thanksgiving, I'm almost craving doing that slightly longer
Yes.
because I'm like, I crave feeling that way and feeling empty and light and energetic. And yeah, for me, I think once I found what made me feel my best, I started to gravitate towards that. And that's what I hope, this way of eating does for people. You find out what makes you feel your best, and then you always want to feel that way. So even if you go a little bit in the other direction, you're like, oh no, I need to feel that way again. And it becomes easier to do.
Yeah, that's another important point. It's like sometimes people have felt so terrible for so long they don't understand how much better they can feel within a week or two until they make some changes. So are you usually doing like 2 meals on most days then? And do you like to eat a little bit earlier? Because I know people are wondering, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, what
Yeah.
works for you, but people still want to know, like, okay, well, what do you do? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I think when I started, I skipped breakfast and I did 2 meals a day. Uh, because I think for a lot of people, dinner is a social event, whether it's with your family or you're going out or whatever, dinner tends to be the social event. It's certainly easier to skip breakfast. In recent times, though, I've learned that circadian fasting is probably a whole lot better. For people, particularly women. So I've tried to do that, and that's something that we're doing at home now. I still work from home, but when my husband comes back from work, we'll just have a quick meal at like 6 p.m. and we're done. And then I, start eating at like 9 a.m. or whatever the next day. But it can be different for people, especially now. I think after COVID, people are going back into the office. It can be harder to do one way versus another. So I think sticking with whatever's easiest to implement, least friction, might be best. But I've tried both ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did the same thing. Like I always like, oh, or I'm just gonna fast all morning until lunchtime or a little after lunchtime. Sometimes I would throw in some 24-hour fast, and I still do, just like you do, as a gut reset. And just I feel so good even after a 24-hour fast or a 36-hour fast every once in a while. But now I've shifted that window back a little bit earlier, and I eat dinner earlier. And I just like, for my personal body, that tends to work better because I'm such an early riser. I like get
Me
up,
too.
get things done,
Yeah.
super motivated all morning, and then like I'm junk at night. So I'm like, why would I eat most of my food later? I've always been that circadian rhythm person where I get up, I wake up when it's light out, and I'm ready to go to bed when it's dark out. So okay, so
I've read your book, so I've read, you have a lot of different, you suggest to mix things up,
yeah,
vary your fasts. I haven't tried that specifically, so I'm
yeah.
curious to do it sometime.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer in, if it works for you, stick with it. People are like, do I have to switch things up if I'm still losing weight? Like, no, you hang with that as long as it works for you. You're seeing progress and you feel good. When you need to switch things up is if you've hit a stall, you're not seeing progress, you're not hitting your goals. Then it's time to look at, there's a reason why that certain regimen or however you have things structured isn't working for you anymore. But yeah, I'm like, if you hit your goals with a 16-8, great. Like, who am I to say, yeah, you got to change things up. So yeah, I'm a firm believer in writing things out as long as it's working for you and you feel good. And, people always ask about clean fasting and, well, I bulletproof my coffee and I still hit all my goals. Well, great. It's like that's you and that works. So who am I to say you should switch things up? So, yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents. But tell us where, so this airs January 10th. Tell us where to find your book, The Vegetarian Reset. Again, it's a beautiful book, you guys. It's really, really well thought out and the pictures are gorgeous. When is it available and where do we find it?
So the book is going to land on bookshelves on January 17th. That is the official publication date. So it is actually available for pre-order now until then. So you can pre-order it wherever books are sold. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your favorite indie bookstore. You could go there and request them to pre-order the book. And we have a fun pre-order campaign going where if you pre-order the book prior to January 17th, you will get 15 bonus recipes directly to your inbox. So you don't have to wait till the 17th to get started trying. And you have to get these 15 recipes by going to thevegetarianreset.com. You click, there's a button called already pre-ordered. You go in there, you click and you submit your order information. And shortly thereafter, you will have an email with a PDF with 15 low-carb recipes that are not in the book and are an additional bonus. So you can learn more about the book if you would like to at thevegetarianreset.com. You can download a free sample of the book. You can click through a book video if you would like, learn more about my journey and my philosophy, sign up for my newsletter, or you could just go and order the book through your favorite website.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's available and it can be done. A low carb vegetarian approach can definitely be done. You can eat a vegetarian and lifestyle and include that and still reverse your prediabetes or whatever disease state that PCOS, fatty liver, type 2 diabetes, you can do it and still be vegetarian. So this is a great resource to help people achieve that goal. I do have one more question that I wrote down that I'm really curious about because I like to do a lot of cooking, but I haven't done like the food science behind it kind of gets away from me sometimes. But I noticed in the intro, when you use butter, it says to use unsalted versus salted. Can you just tell? I'm so curious. Like, is that just more of a flavor thing, or is there something behind that food science wise? Okay.
I tend to use unsalted butter when I cook, so that I can just add the salt separately and I know how much I'm adding. But you could use salted butter and just be aware that there's already some salt in there, so you might need to add a little bit less. I tend to use salted butter more like on a sourdough slice or something, but if I think cooking with salted butter is completely fine. It's not it won't affect the dish.
Okay, that's what I'm like, is this gonna actually make this not work for some reason? I figured it was more of a flavor thing, but I was curious. I'm like, oh, I never, because I have both in my house, but I don't really pay attention to which one I'm using for what sometimes. So, well, thank you for this interview and thank you for developing this resource. It's like I said, it's very important. It's great to have some resources. I know sometimes people feel like they're kind of up against the wall when they know they have a disease process to reverse, and yet they want to follow a vegetarian approach. And what I teach doesn't always, that those concepts are simple, but it's not easy when you take meat out of the equation to hit your target. So very, very excited to have this resource to offer people. It's very important work. I know how much work goes into developing a recipe book and getting it out there. So we'll do the best we can. Go and tell all your friends about this book. And I love having it in my kitchen. I mean, I'm not vegetarian, but there are some beautiful recipes in here that are so good. I was lucky enough, Vasudha mailed me a copy. So I was so excited. I've had my copy for a couple of weeks now. So thank you for sending that to me, and thank you for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And, Shana was so nice to give me a beautiful review of my book. And I am so honored to have received that, because I think the work that you do just to heal people, and I think there's just so few of that out there, and I'm shocked that there's so few, because this way of life is so effective, that I think that the work that you're doing is hugely important, and you're helping so many people. So thank you. And I'm so thrilled that I was able to come on this podcast and connect with your audience. I hope people find the book helpful. And thank you so much for your support.
Absolutely. We'll link everything in the show notes. And thank you again for offering another resource for us to reverse our insulin resistance. It's really important.
My pleasure.